So I've coached and mentored many people over the years, and what I've noticed is that everyone kind of knows that plans are the foundation for UX research, but how do you build a robust foundation? And what I've found with working with junior designers and researchers is they work without a plan. They move directly to choosing methods and, oh, I hear that from the stakeholders. Let me go do an interview right away without working through all of the protocols. And is an interview enough? And at what time and place should the interview be for? And that kind of thing. I've critiqued many research plans that were too short or too long. I've critiqued ones that were not detailed enough or were way too detailed. You don't want to have to read a novel and write a novel, let alone read one. And some research plans focus on the wrong things. And you have to keep in mind that sometimes they're not written for stakeholders, they're only written for you because you need to understand what you want to do as a researcher, but you also have to convey that what you want to do for stakeholders. But just as important on writing a research plan for the end users, meaning the stakeholders, you also have to think through what you want to do for yourself. So there is a combination of writing for stakeholders and writing for yourself. So the right plan is a robust plan. Let's learn how to write one today. Before we get into the nitty-gritty, I wanted to explain a little bit about what you'll get out of this presentation. First of all, after this presentation, this deck will be presented to you on the UXPA website, and details on that will be covered at the end of this presentation. And this deck represents the best of my thinking over the years, combined with what I've referenced other designers, other researchers doing who are really, really good leaders in the field. So this presentation alone will be a really good starting point. In the presentation are many different frameworks that you can use to choose which research methods you'd like to use in your in your research plans and in your research projects. And finally, there is a very, very robust, lengthy appendix with resources and templates. So if you want more details on anything that I have, including my own personal notes that go beyond what this deck talks about, that will be in the appendix. So here's the agenda for today. We're going to start off with what is a UX research plan and what is it used for. Then we're going to go on why is a plan important. Then we're going to go into the UX research plan that stakeholders love, the one pager or the too long didn't read for the Reddit crowd. What can you write that's the shortest version? And then research method frameworks, and a conclusion, tidying everything up, and then the lengthy appendix, which I'll highlight some of the resources for you. So what is a research plan and what is it used for? So a research plan is a systematic way to gain knowledge and fill gaps about what you need to know more about. So the way I kind of think about it is similar to how I've played video games in the past. So bear with me, I'm about to make a video game metaphor. In certain games that you are called real-time strategy games, you start off with a map. And that map is what you know or what is known, and the fog or the clouds are the unknown. And what happens is your research will help you navigate from the known to the unknown, and gradually that map becomes bigger and bigger, and you can see underneath all the terrain and all the knowledge and all of the things that you're going to learn. So what else is a research plan? A research plan is kind of like a to-do list on steroids. It lays out ahead of time, why are you going to do research? What are you going to ask? Who are you going to involve? When are you going to do certain things? Where are those things going to be done? And how are you going to conduct that research? It's really an all-encompassing document that lays out your thinking ahead of time so that you have a plan to follow and you're not just going by the seat of your pants. A UX research plan is what turns raw curiosity into a precise and professional exploration of a topic. What separates novices from professionals, in my opinion, is a really strong research plan, because what comes out of a research plan is strong research. A research plan is simultaneously a source of truth for you and your team to get on the same page, and ideally it is a live document that gets updated over time, because as we know in UX, everything is iterative. Now I'm going to let you in on a little known quote unquote secret, but if you write a really good research plan, it makes writing your research case study or UX design case study a lot better, a lot easier, and a lot more effective. Because a well-documented project at the beginning is quality in, and then you'll get quality out. And so often I will find that after long projects, remembering what I've done, going back through my research plan, I find that I can pull almost directly from that research plan, and I can write a really robust case study. So you want to be, so when to do research, and thus when to write a research plan. So you always, as a researcher or as a UX professional or designer, you want to be looking at opportunities for research to add value as soon as possible. It's never too late to start. And so you need to determine whether it's appropriate for you to conduct research at the stage you're at now. But typically, if the question is, should we be doing research? Research is part of the design process. The answer is probably yes. So research can be conducted at all stages of a project. And this is what the bottom right graph represents, is that research in many projects can be very heavy at the beginning, and it can undulate in the middle and is heavy in the end. You can think of the beginning as the exploration or the discovery research, and the end as your evaluative testing research. And so, and that star at the beginning is creating that plan, so you kind of know when to plan for spikes in the middle and when to go for the long haul, the beginning and the end. So this lecture focuses on being part of the design process. On the left, there are 7 steps about creating research. The first one, determine what needs to be learned. Number 2, plan research initiatives and how learning will occur. That's what I'm talking about here. All the later stages of gathering information, analyzing findings and data synthesis, that comes later. And then many of us should be familiar with the double diamond of design. And this is where we are here. We're at the beginning. So a research plan, as ideally as possible, should be done at the beginning of a project. So why is a plan important? And I actually copied a quote from Benjamin Franklin, who said, if you fail to plan, you are planning to fail, which I think is really the main takeaway from this presentation, is a plan is essential to success for research. So it increases your likelihood of success, and it helps your team get organized. You're the leader, and they want to know where you're leading them to. It provides transparency and visibility to stakeholders and team members. It helps you clearly articulate and align your team's priorities. Often you'll find that people think they're on the same page until you give them something concrete and tangible to act on. And that concrete and tangible thing is that research plan. And you'll begin to notice by sharing it with it, maybe the stakeholders weren't on the same page. And it reduces ambiguity and thus anxiety about projects and the progresses you're going to make. So really, at the end of the day, it's a contract, a promise of what you're going to do. So that's all kind of high level and abstract. But let's talk about, what is a research plan look like, and how can you write one with the right things in it? So you don't have to overthink things. I'm going to go and read through the 5 things that a research plan needs to do. And then I'm going to give you a template that you can follow. That's one of my favorite templates that I found in all my years as a UX professional. So think about it. It might feel overwhelming to write a research plan in a new way or to write a research plan at the beginning of a project, but all it needs to do is 5 simple things. 1, the questions that you are trying to answer, it has to cover that. Why it's important to answer them in the first place. The methods and techniques that you will use to answer each and every question. The resources, meaning time, money, people, materials, and equipment. And finally, when and where the research activities will take place and who will do it. So it's pretty straightforward. The template that I'm referring to is Tomer Sharon created this template that's on smashingmagazine.com, and it's called the UXR plan that stakeholders love. And I have found it is the shortest thing you need to follow in order to create a plan that's robust enough to get started. Now you can certainly do more, but this is like the MVP, the minimum viable product of a research plan. So it goes through 8 sections. We've got number 1, the title, date, author, team, and stakeholders. Then we've got the background, which describes what led up to this study, a recent history of the project. Number 3 are goals, high-level reasons for conducting the study. 4, the research questions that you're going to ask. Now, keep in mind, these research questions are not the questions you actually ask participants, but the questions you want the project as a whole to answer. And 5, the methodology. This is where you go into picking the techniques that you're going to use, the methodologies, the approaches, and who are you going to do those methodologies with? Who are you going to include? Those are the participants. That's number 6. And I'm highlighting 4 and 5. Why am I highlighting those? Because you have to ask the right questions and you have to ask them in the right way. That is the meat, that is the potatoes of a research plan. Now, I could give a whole lecture on how to ask the right questions, but that's a lot more complex and a little bit beyond the scope of this lecture. What I do want to talk about is asking the right way, picking the right methods. I have attended a lot of lectures on how to pick the right methods, and I have found that they're a little bit lacking, and it's taken me a while to figure out what process I need to follow in order to find the right approach. Finally, there's a timeline and a schedule, and I'll go into a little deeper on how to do scheduling, and then output and deliverables. What are you going to get and provide? What are stakeholders going to get, and what are you going to provide at the end of the project? So a tip on Google Docs, if you're using them, I'm going to play a little video here, is I said this was a live document, and you might be wanting to go back to previous versions of your document. You don't have to save them as separate files. There's a relatively hidden feature in Google Docs that I'm about to show you where you can browse previous versions. And as you iterate, let's say that your stakeholder says, hey, we didn't agree to this one thing. You can go back a couple versions and say, actually, we did. So if you can see my mouse in the upper middle of the screen, I'm going to play the video. This is the version control within Google Docs, and you can name the versions and then say only show the named versions. And so that's the way to go back into that. And the thing you wanted to do is after help on the menu, last edit was seconds ago is underlined. You can click on that, and then your living and breathing document will track all changes. So that's a relatively new feature in Google Docs if you're using it, so that you don't have to be saving version 1, version 2. And we all know the dreaded version final. So naming it that way doesn't have to be anymore. So let's talk about robust planning. So you have either, pick what metaphor you want, a tool belt of research methods or utility belt of research methods, but we all have a suite of, several dozen research methods we could possibly use. How do you know which ones to use? Well, first you got to think about qualitative research where we talk to 10 people and uncover 100 things, or quantitative research where we talk to 100 people and we validate 10 things. And when you combine those two together, you get mixed methods research. So research is typically stronger when you mix qualitative and quantitative work. I call mixed methods triangulating the truth, because you need at least 2 data points in triangulation, 2 locations to know where your positioning is. So think about, like, I know a lot of researchers, a majority of them that I've worked with and know are qualitative, working to build up that quantitative muscle, and also working with quantitative researchers will help you create a more robust research plan. Now, all these methods cover only 3 things. Research methods can elude and elicit and uncover attitudes, or behavior, comprehension, and attitudes, or ABC. Now, if you take this framework of attitudes, behavior, and comprehension, you can bring yourself into the Nielsen-Norman diagram that was created by Christian Roher. And basically, on the y-axis, there's behavioral to attitudinal to behavioral, and on the x-axis, there's qualitative to quantitative. And then there's a color code at the bottom about whether things are natural use, whether they're scripted. So you can take a look at all of these research methods. And again, this will be in the appendix. So you can try to take a look that certain research methods are behavioral, certain ones are behavioral and natural use of a product, some of them are behavioral and scripted. So this is kind of a 3D map, if you will, because the 2D is the X and Y axis, and the third dimension is the color and shape. Now, a little known framework by Catherine Bennett. She teaches design thinking to students at a particular university that I forget the name of, but she created a flow chart about, research plan, figuring out, like, I'm going to follow the bottom path that's pink and orange, finding out what people feel, understanding experience, and going to Velcro modeling, which is a particular methodology that she teaches. So there are people out there that have created flow charts to help you to determine that. There's also Emma Bolton and Matthew Godfrey created this thing called the research funnel. And all research can be going from exploratory, meaning the big picture, defining the problems themselves. From that to strategic, the problem is known already. Defining a customer and audience and strategy. Tactical, ad hoc research, planning, operational research, and operational is day-to-day research reporting. So your methods or your approach could be at any of these levels, and you want to talk with stakeholders. Are we being strategic? Are we being tactical? And are we supposed to be exploratory? So you really got to talk about what level you're at and what you want to look into. Now, the final framework I'm going to be describing to you is a little bit complicated, so I'm going to be talking about it in parts. And it's created by Twig and Fish, and it's called the Incredible Framework. And I'll let you know why it's called the Incredible Framework in a second. But it's basically 4 boxes that are read in this order: discovery research, exploratory research, definition research, and validation research. And it gets a little easier to read when you think about the fact that each one of these boxes corresponds to part of the diamond in the design thinking process, in that double diamond process. So number one is discovery research. So an example would be, what do busy intercompany collaborators do? If you're working with other people, that would be a question to ask. So that's going to be in that quadrant. In the next quadrant, taking it a step further, how do those people who are collaborating between companies, how do they manage their schedules so that they can collaborate? It's going a step deeper. One more step deeper is, where are all the ways we can schedule? And that's more about product. And the final one, does weekly and monthly toggle view work? So we're going from broad to specific, and it's called the N credible framework because the path you follow is actually an N. And the beauty of this framework is Twig and Fish will actually put this quadrant on a wall as a poster, and the stakeholders in a workshop will place their questions in the different quadrants. And you might find that there are different questions in one quadrant than the other. In this example, exploratory research was where most of the stakeholders put their questions. And so it really gets you and them on the same page. And what you would do from all of these frameworks is pick the right methods, put them in your research plan, and you're going to actually talk about, the next thing I'm going to talk about is, once you've decided what you're going to do, the next question is, when are you going to do it? So you want to learn just enough project management to be dangerous, to determine when to do what. And the best tool, the best thing I've ever found that helps me plan my timing in my research plans is a Gantt chart. Now, you may have seen this before and you may not be familiar with this, but basically there's activities and tasks on the left and a timeline at the top and color codes just to help with readability. And basically you're able to see when one activity or task begins and when one task or activity ends, and when multiple activities are overlapping. So are you doing surveys before, after, or during when you're doing interviews? Having a visualization of this in some way is really, really powerful, and actually has saved me from projects where the schedule seemed to make sense until I put it in a Gantt chart, and then I realized I was doing way too much in too little of a time. Now, how do you create a Gantt chart? Well, Chris Croft on lynda.com has absolutely the best way to create Gantt charts. I would highly recommend following his video. In an hour and a half, you'll be able to master timing, estimation, creating Gantt charts, and you can directly apply it to research. Now, you don't want to be a project manager, but you can use the same techniques and you can use the same tools as those people. So OmniPlan at the top, Asana, ClickUp, or Monday.com are common tools where there are features where you can create Gantt charts. So if you're not using Gantt charts today, I would highly recommend you take a look at them, because this will help make your timeline in your research plan that much more foolproof, and you'll be surprised a lot less with what's going to come up on the pipeline. And of course, just like the research plan itself, this can be an iterative document that can change over time as well. And it gives you something tangible to know when things are going on. And I think it's a lot easier to read than a monthly calendar. So I went through a lot and I went through it pretty fast, but I only have about a half an hour. So in conclusion, just like in battle, a plan is essential to success, and yet no plan survives the first contact with users. So be flexible, be agile, be ready to adapt to change, and plan as you go. So as for the appendix, I have a Google Doc that you can click on Learn More, and it actually goes into great depth beyond what I was able to talk about in today's lecture. There are articles on each of the 5 different frameworks that I brought up, plan templates that I mentioned, including the one by Tomer Sharon, deliverables, along with how to figure out how many participants to ask to talk to for different methodologies. These are heuristics, recommended guidelines of how many people do you talk to, these nitty-gritty details of how many people do we need for eye tracking, how many people do we need for a diary study. These are really important to figure out, and it's really hard to determine sometimes how many people you need. So I go through that, and I go through several resources. Adaptive paths, when they used to exist before they got acquired. I've written some blog posts of recommended time for how long it's going to take you to do certain activities. And yeah, so that's robust research planning in a little bit under half an hour. And I would love to take some questions.
You guys want to use the chat, feel free to put a question in the chat if you have one.
Oh, are we going off the chat?
No, I mean, if I'm just saying, if people want to ask a question in the chat, that's fine too.
Okay, yeah, so feel free to unmute yourself and ask a question, and I'll do my best to answer it. What is the app above Asana is a question. It was a, let me pull that up. The one above Asana, it's a yellow icon. It's called OmniPlan by the Omni Group. It's a Mac only application that's the equivalent of Microsoft Planning. Another question is, what's your approach when planning for use of new methodology for the first time as far as the research plan goes? That's a really good question. Sometimes you might realize that you need to use research methodologies that you don't know. So in lean or agile terminology, that's called a research spike. So I often will say, oh, I need a week to explore. Let's say there's a method that I haven't used before, like user story mapping, for instance. I might need a week to learn about the topic and learn how complicated the topic is and build that into my research plan. So a research plan is a learning plan, and part of the learning plan is you have to learn how to do something in order to help your project move forward. So you would create that as buffer time to front end before you would actually be doing the research. And you would check in iteratively with your stakeholders to make sure you had enough time to learn that methodology, because some methodologies take longer to learn than others. What are some ways you advocate for the value of UX research with product stakeholders? I often will provide examples from literature and other case studies that I've found online. But I have found the way to advocate for the value of UX research is to start small and do it through proving value. So if you pick a low risk project that allows you to showcase research and how it allowed you to be successful, stakeholders will emotionally feel the progress and the success from that project. And they're like, oh, this research thing, there's all these myths about research. It takes too long, it costs too much, it delays things. But if you can prove in a small way that they don't live up to those stereotypes and you provide value, you can start small and start growing over time. It's about building trust in a relationship. Would you mind reiterating how we can access the presentation slides after the session? Lars or Tom, would you like to explain?
Yeah. So I'm currently posting on our website, which I'll just send a link into the chat. Hopefully I'll get that up before the session's over. And then we'll also send it out with the email like maybe a follow-up email afterwards. Does that sound right, Tom?
Yeah, that sounds great.
Okay.
So will you put it on the event itself, on the events page?
Yeah, I'll create a button for it. I'm doing that right now.
Yeah. I'm wondering, Mo, if you could just pull up your slide where you've detailed out like the actual research plan itself.
The research plan, what?
The research plan itself, I think it was 7 points.
Ah, yeah, let me pull that up.
And did you say that that was your design, or did it come from somewhere else? Or
Let me share my screen. Give me 1 second. So this one here, or was it this one here?
no, where you actually detail out what is under, yeah, there you go. No, next one, that's it. So
Yeah.
the 1 through.
Yeah, so this one is from Tomer Sharon,
Okay,
who
yeah.
has an article in Smashing Magazine called The UX Plan That Stakeholders Love. It's definitely been my go-to as like a boilerplate place to start. And the article is actually called The UXR Plan That Stakeholders Love.
And can you just show the next slide? Okay. I mean, obviously, like we can get this from your PDF, but this I feel like is the meat and potatoes, as you said, right?
Yeah, this is the meat and the potatoes. This is how you cover all these 8 things, and you should be able to cover these 8 things to varying degrees. If you're, if you're really sure of what you're doing, you'll write a lot in all of these, but again, it's iterative. So you might start small, but these are the 7 category or 8 categories of things you need to cover.
Okay. And do you have a good resource for research questions?
Because each project is so specific, there aren't usually good resources for research questions. Now, I will say that there are some articles that I found that are good research questions for particular research methods. So for instance, for personas, what are good questions to ask for personas? That's a Googleable thing. You can search for that in Medium and that'll exist. What are good questions for journey mapping and that kind of thing? But usually because the research itself depends on the domain, the industry, the focus, and the constraints of the project, it's really hard to find those things. One person that does come to mind is, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, a woman named Sarah Doody has a good list of research starter questions for generic projects.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, I got another question in the chat. What kinds of communities and conferences would you recommend UX researchers get involved with? There is a Google group called, like a Google email group called UX Design and Research, I believe. Let me double check and pull that up really quickly in order for me to make sure that I got that correctly. So it's called Design ampersand or and User Research. It's a Google group. You kind of have to be invited to it, but if you search it online on Google Groups, you can find it. But actually, I have found really good local chapters of UXPA and IXDA. I'm in a lot of Slack groups. One of them is Mixed Methods, which is really good. And there's a lot of good Slack groups out there. I would type in, there's also one called UXRC, UX Resources, and one other one called Research Ops. So Slack is like a new way for designers and UX people and researchers to get together. And so I would start looking there. I've had okay luck with Facebook groups, but not much. And LinkedIn has been hit or miss. But Slack and that Google groups are really where I have found the most beneficial things. Another question. I am a recent grad of a UX bootcamp and is wondering if there are any podcasts, blogs, or other media you suggest I follow to continue to learn about UX research. You know, I subscribe to a bunch of research and UX blogs or podcasts, but I don't listen to them. What I realized is I follow a lot of people on Medium, and I do keyword searches on different topics, and I realize who has meaningful articles, and then I follow them on Medium. So I read a lot faster than I listen, and it's a lot easier for me to retain information when I read. So I'd highly recommend Medium. The leaders in the field are on there, and people don't typically have their own blogs on their own websites anymore. On my website, I actually list a lot of the people that I follow on Medium as well. So mogoltz.com/resources. Oh, Kevin Lang on YouTube. Liang, he's really good. I forgot about him. He is a really good resource on YouTube. He focuses on novice or junior UX researchers specifically. Michelle Rosnan of Curiosity Tank is a good person to follow on LinkedIn. She's really, really good as well. What are some ways that you've made the handoff from research to wireframe and product connecting easier and more efficient? The best way is to have multidisciplinary integrated teams where you're not throwing things over the fence. I call myself a design strategist in addition to a researcher because I want to be there with the designers as they're implementing the strategy that was implied explicitly by the research. And so it's being a thought partner, an accountability partner, and a true partner with your design colleagues so that research doesn't get lost at the end and you really work collaboratively with them. You might not be the best artist or designer in the world. You might be more of a researcher, but can you whiteboard with people? Can you sticky note with people and really continue that conversation and keep on in those conversations referencing what you learned from the research and reminding them about the personas, reminding them about the like design principles and that kind of thing. And it's just through collaboration rather than throwing things over the fence. Do you have any horror stories that user research experience that you are allowed to share?
I like it.
Well, I won't name the company, but as much as I talked about collaboration and working on multidisciplinary teams, there is a horror story where I was the only researcher dedicated to product on the entire company, which was a startup. And they wanted me to work on 12 different projects simultaneously while helping them do things that a product manager should have been doing. And as a new employee, I wanted to please everyone. So rather than say, no, I can't do 12 projects at once well, and I'm not a product manager, I just tried to fulfill everyone's requests and ended up failing at all of them simultaneously. So what I will say is I've learned to advocate for myself set healthy boundaries, and this is really crucial with a research plan, it helps set realistic and accurate and specific expectations for what to expect out of a project. Because when you write something down, you're including things and you're excluding things, and that will help you prevent what happened to me for a horror story. Yeah.
So my question, Mo, I was going to type it out, but this may be too complicated. So within like a design team, have you noticed a moment of critical mass where the team is growing enough to start to include even like a full-time researcher compared to maybe just doing like more ad hoc on the fly type of research? Like, where does the team need to get to, do you think, in order to bring on a design researcher if the organization doesn't already have one?
That's a
That
really
might be
good,
too abstract.
that's a really good question. I think it has to do with like velocity on like lean and agile teams. There's so many user stories they want to get through in a certain period of time. There's a certain amount of output and there's a certain amount of outcome that teams want. And at some point, they're not going to be meeting their goals and they're not going to be meeting their aspirations. And of course, you have to have time and budget to hire a new person, but you have to advocate for the fact like, hey, our team is producing results that either aren't sophisticated enough because we don't have somebody that's an expert in research, or we're not meeting our deadlines, or we're not having enough features, or we're not having enough X, Y, or Z. So we need to increase our velocity. And so either you're going to do more work and or higher quality work. And at that point, you have to start advocating for hiring somebody full on. Now, a way to get access to hiring a researcher maybe earlier on is maybe that researcher works on 2 teams and is a shared resource and helps. And then eventually you have 1 researcher for 1 team.
Okay, yeah, thank you.
What kind of research repository do you recommend? Is this the type of repository different than depending on how large the team is? Was told that a formal repository requires an overhead and makes more sense if there are 3 or more researchers. So I have almost no experience with research repositories, but I do know that I think it's called UX Tools. Every year there's a survey that goes out for UX research tools, and every year there's new research repositories. It's a relatively new field that's related to UX operations, which in of itself is very nascent. And so you have to pick something that people will actually use, that's simple enough so that it will continuously be used. But as for a specific research repository, I can't really speak to it, but I would recommend looking up the yearly survey. I believe it's called UX Tools. It's in green, their logo. And they make a map of all the research tools that looks like a subway map. And it has a section on repositories, and those repositories, those change year to year. And a note on tools, I have been told countless times by mentors and coaches of mine, and I believe it myself, that process and understanding your craft trumps tools. But at some point, when you reach enough critical mass and you want to leverage the research that's being done, you are going to need a research repository. Picking that one is kind of an organizational stylistical preference. I know Airbnb uses Airtable and they have their own framework. And I know Aurelius is one that I've heard some good things about. But again, it'll depend on how like robust and complex is the tool, because you need something fast and easy to put stuff in and take stuff out. So I can't recommend anything in particular, unfortunately.
I had a question. I am a senior at KCAI and I'm doing my thesis on a UX project. And I was wondering, like I kind of started doing my branding, and then I took a step back and was looking at my wireframes and the functions of all of my wireframes, and I wanted to make sure they aligned with my branding. So I did those. I'm starting to do the wireframes first, and then I'm going to go back and look at my branding. And I was wondering if you could speak to your process in that, and like
Yeah.
how you move between the two.
So a brand is an entity that makes a promise. When you buy Patagonia, you kind of know what you're getting. And when you buy North Face, it's different. You kind of know what you're getting, and you get Nike versus Reebok. I personally am like functionality first, allowing users to accomplish their goals and do so in certain ways. And through your research, if you have design principles, those should inform your wireframes and your wire flows and your scenarios and those kinds of things. And your design principles could actually correlate into your brand as well. And so I would say the brand you might have in the back of your head, but it's what is the brand promising? A brand promises an outcome, not an output. A wireframe is an output. An outcome is what can somebody do with the thing that you've made, and how is their life different as a result? What does your brand stand for? And what you might want to do is start with functionality first, which is what you're doing. Look at branding and oscillate between the two. Is your functionality living up to the design principles? Do the design principles relate to the brand? And so I would kind of use that. And also branding has a lot to do with UI and how you make things look and how those things evoke certain emotional responses and associations with other concepts. So I think you're right to focus on the right functionality level, because what good in the world is a great brand that looks nice if the brand that the app is representing doesn't really help them accomplish their goals? So I think you're on the right track, and don't be afraid to oscillate. Okay, I've done the wireframes for a while. How does that relate to the brand? But to me, branding is something that is later on in the timeline.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. You said research plan is for the stakeholders and yourself and team. Do you share the same document with all of the creators, or do you create a separate presentation for stakeholders? If the project is simple enough or small enough, it can be the same document. And if it's larger and more complex, I will often have two versions of the document. I'll have one that's like really over the top, really detail oriented, covering all my bases. And then I'll have a simplified version, because stakeholders want that executive summary. They want the briefest thing that they can consume and get confidence that you're doing the right thing. So it kind of depends, but I often will do it when the project is large or complex enough.
I know we have only 5 minutes left, so if anybody has any questions, drop them in the chat. I also wanted to point out that the Google or the presentation can be found on our website, uxpa-kc.org/events. And it's just down here a little bit at this past events section where you can click download presentation. There it'll pull up a PDF.
And will there be a video recording of this available as well?
Yep, this will go to our YouTube page and shared on LinkedIn and things like that.
Nice. Okay.
Yeah.
That should be up within the next day.
And can you post the link in the chat to that YouTube channel as well?
Yeah.
Well, Mo, this has been great. You are a wealth of information.
Thank you very much. It was my pleasure to be able to help you guys learn a little bit more. And I hope your next research plan is that much better as a result.
So what's the best way for people to get in touch with you if they have like further questions or I know you said you had the website, right?
Yeah, if you go to my website, I have a contact form, so mogoltz.com, and there's a contact me section. And I will actually type that out in the chat.
Great.
So there is my website. Yep.
And presumably you're on LinkedIn.
You can also feel free to LinkedIn message me and connect with me. I'll be happy to connect.
So I had one brief question. I know we have 3 minutes left. So Mo, with your history in UX research in the UX field, where do you see UX research going 5, 10 years from now as our field kind of grows? I mean, what have you seen? What do you think about that?
That's a really tough question. I like it though. As the tools, I've begun to hear rumblings about AI assisted research. So right now, qualitative researchers need to find things manually and really like piecemeal things together from the ground up. But there are certain tools that are coming out that are AI assisted. Actually, right now in Google Docs and Google Sheets, there's this thing called the Assistant that will pull up relevant information that's like pertinent to what you're working on in your current document. And Qualtrics already has AI assistive functionality. So I think AI tools are going to be that way. And then also I think right now we have qualitative research and quantitative researchers. And I'm thinking that dichotomy will probably always be there because there's such deep different skill sets. But I think quantitative researchers will need to learn a little bit more about qual, and qualitative researchers will need to learn a little bit more about quant. That will help independent researchers be more effective at mixed methods, but also help with collaboration more. The more you know about other people's disciplines, the better you can work with them.
That's a great
Cool. Thanks.
Yeah.
And I just have one final question, maybe. You talked about collaborating with other disciplines. So do you do a lot of like drawing in other disciplines as stakeholders to your research process? And are you successful?
When I was working in-house at startups and at enterprises, I did a lot more with multidisciplinary teams that were engineers and PMs and that kind of thing. Now I'm working with like a UI person, a designer, a researcher. So I'm still multidisciplinary, but people that are more strongly related to the UX field. And the stakeholders are mostly business representatives or project and product managers. So I think what's missing for me, since I'm in consulting now, I'm not in production, I'm no longer working with engineers as much. But I think that skill set of collaboration and learning enough about what other people are doing still applies. But that can shift over one's career, and it definitely depends on what kind of company you're working at.
Mm-hmm. Right.
What is the favorite part of my job? I get to be paid to be curious, talk to interesting people, and help change the future of companies, products, and services, and really feel like I play a role in using my interests, skills, and talents to make a difference.
Nice, you got that down.
Yeah.
That's an elevator pitch for sure. It sounds like your family knows what you do more than mine.
I had to train them. It was really hard. It took several years.
Yeah.
I call it the cocktail party answer. You just got to give something that's like boom, 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 boom. Thank you, everybody. Thank you so much.